It's safe to say Nintendo Directs changed gaming as we know it. This specific format of presentations directly sharing information with your audience has been adopted by companies industry-wide, and it feels like you can't go a week without hearing about someone who heard something from someone else about one of these Nintendo Direct presentations. Now, you guys know we mainly talk about the games and not necessarily just the presentations themselves, but this time a lot of interesting stuff is happening. Nintendo has deliberately chosen to stray from their typical communication strategies in a year this important, like this is the biggest year for them, introducing the successor to their most successful console ever. However, the Switch 2 has gotten off to an incredible start. So in this video, I want to talk about the current situation Nintendo finds themselves in, and also general trends in the gaming industry at large, to answer one specific question. Does Nintendo even really need a Direct? I'll also be going into what the next Direct could include for Nintendo, because there are some weird specific events such as Mario's 40th anniversary that draw plenty of parallels to events we've seen in the past. So we'll be using all of this to predict the future of Nintendo Directs as we know it, so let's dive in. In order to answer our first question of does Nintendo need a Direct, we need to understand their current positioning in the market. The Switch 2 has come out of the gate hot with a really successful opening launch. The console was flying off store shelves, breaking records, and all the headlines seemed really positive. However, just the console selling this well out of the gate is arguably the least important part of this year for Nintendo, who is obviously trying to reach their goal of making the Switch 2 as successful as the Switch 1. The Switch 1 was Nintendo's most successful console ever, so naturally the Switch 2 was going to sell really well out of the gate. I'm not saying anything Nintendo themselves doesn't know. The Switch 2 sold incredibly at the start, but Nintendo needs to still build up hype around the console and release quality games on the console. As for the games, Nintendo's first two big swings on the Switch 2 were home runs. In fact, in my opinion, they were both grand slams. I cannot praise Donkey Kong Bonanza enough. If you enjoy fun video games, that is the game for you. And despite Nintendo actively sabotaging Mario Kart World by declaring war on the community that just wants to race normal Mario Kart tracks, you can't deny that it's also an incredibly fun game in its own right. However, now we get to the point of building up hype, and these two games were huge, but they were also the two big games for the Switch 2. These games bookended the last big Nintendo Direct being the Switch 2 presentation, but interestingly enough, they did not bookend the year. While the big two Switch 1 launch year games were Mario Odyssey and Breath of the Wild, which came out at the end of the year and start of the year respectively, Bonanza and Mario Kart World released a month and a half apart. So Nintendo has made good on their promise of delivering good games. Again, I cannot speak highly enough of the first two big Switch 2 exclusives, but this is where we get to the problem with their current strategy, because now we no longer have that Switch 2 exclusive North Star tentpole title to look forward to. Compare it with the Switch 1. Throughout 2017, there were other games releasing, but ever since Donkey Kong Bonanza released, there hasn't really been a game that fits that slot for the Switch 2. Ironically, for the Switch 1, Metroid Prime 4 also kind of acted as a game that we were just, nebulously looking forward to, as that was infamously announced all the way back in June of 2017. It's coming out, supposedly, this year, and I'm also very excited for it, but it's a Nintendo Switch 1 game. And I just want to say this now, I've talked at length on this channel about how interested I am in the idea of doing Nintendo Switch 2 editions. This entire video was basically me saying I think Nintendo's gonna prolong the Switch 1 lifespan and give us Nintendo Switch 2 editions, and I'm kind of okay with that. But I also said in that video they do not replace straight up Switch 2 exclusives. No one thinks that. They're kind of just an added bonus. So something like Prime 4, as excited as I am to play that on my Switch 2, it doesn't necessarily fit the big holiday launch year game archetype I'm talking about. The problem gets a little deeper when you investigate the very clear missteps Nintendo is making. I already briefly mentioned this, but Nintendo sabotaging Mario Kart World by actively updating the game, forcing players to play in their preferred way, but not the player's preferred way. They are certainly hampering the success of that game. Obviously, it will sell really well, but it'll be harder for Mario Kart World to hold a really massive engaged player base and community when most of the players can't play the way they want to play online. Another misstep Nintendo is making is what they're doing with Switch 2 dev kits. I thought the whole point of waiting all those years like 2023, 2024 with just no Switch 2 news was so that Nintendo would be prepared for the launch of this console. However, pretty much every possible source is saying that Nintendo is being extremely stingy with third-party development kits. Not only are they not handing it out to new smaller studios that might want to make games for Switch 2, but reportedly even large studios partnered with Nintendo in the past are having trouble getting their hands on these. You pretty much need a development kit in order to develop a game for the console, so they're actively hampering hampering their third-party support. I've talked about this game before on the channel, but look at Mousework. This is developed by Nitrome, who have been featured by Nintendo in the past with their work on games like Shovel Knight Dig. They have this incredible Snipper Clips looking couch co-op game called Mousework that is the perfect title for the Switch 2. Like, this is something the Switch 2 needed at launch, and more so even still needs now. However, despite the game seemingly being done, they cannot release the game, and from the limited communication Nitrome has given, all signs are pointing towards, once again, Nintendo being stingy with these dev kits. Why they are doing this, I have absolutely no idea. Maybe they don't have enough of them, maybe they're worried a dev kit will get out into the wild and, spur some hacking spree, I don't know. But it seems a little ridiculous to be hampering the smaller, indie community, especially when that propped up the Switch to such great heights. So now that we've talked about the games that we aren't getting, let's talk about what we are getting. Yes, I've said I don't think there's a big Donkey Kong Bonanza Mario Odyssey style game coming, but there are some titles that will be released. The main one that comes to mind is one that just got a direct and I am extremely excited for, and that is Kirby Air Riders. I love the original Kirby Air Ride on the GameCube, which is why it pains me to say this. I don't want to crap on this game, but I do kind of think it has some fundamental flaws that'll hamper it from being a success. First of all, the original Kirby Air Ride only had 9 tracks, and from what we've seen, it doesn't look like this one will have too many more. Besides that, the original had Top Ride, which is a mode that just seems to be removed in this one, but that's fine. It was kind of like a Mario Party minigame. And then beyond that had City Trial, which is still here. It looks to be pretty much the exact same thing, but a bigger area and more players. I'm excited for this game. Again, I love the original, and the sequel kind of just seems to be like the original it made in the modern day. They're not really doing anything crazy. I mean, the big gimmick here is that there are other playable characters, but there were other playable characters in the first one. They just weren't actually different characters. Here they have different abilities and whatnot, which is cool, but that's kind of the only big change. All this to say, the original Kirby Air Ride is a game that you could play with your friends over and over again, but that was kind of it. And if you didn't really click with City Trial, it is a game very sparse on content. Kind of looks like the same thing's coming in here with Kirby Air Riders, except now it's kind of indirectly competing with Mario Kart World, which pretty much everyone with the Switch 2 already has, and it's going to be a $70 game. So unless they announce some crazy new modes, I just don't see too many people picking this one up, which is kind of a shame because I'm stoked that we're actually getting a Kirby Air Ride sequel after all this time, but it doesn't really seem like this game is being set up for massive success. However, it is being placed in that big holiday slot, releasing in November, so who really knows? Hyrule Warriors I'm expecting to drop in December, but I'm just gonna be honest, that doesn't really do anything. From a sales and engagement perspective, I'm expecting it to do pretty much the exact same as Age of Calamity, except now it'll have a better frame rate. Then we get into the biggest question yet. What about Splatoon Raiders? This is a game that could very easily have been the big North Star for Nintendo. Splatoon has skyrocketed up to being one of Nintendo's most successful franchises, and the potential in its first spin-off I'm sure has fans really excited. However, most people are assuming, in my opinion correctly, this will probably release in 2026. It's been radio silent since they announced it on a random Tuesday morning on Nintendo Today, and it would be a crazy quick turnaround for it to release at some point this year. So to answer the question I posed all the way at the beginning of this video, does Nintendo need a Direct? Well, no, they don't need one. They didn't have one after the Switch 2 launched, opting to obviously forego their normal June presentation, and the Switch 2 is still selling really, really well. They could continue this recent pattern of announcing games and trailers and whatnot on Nintendo Today and Twitter, and then closer to each game's launch doing a big game-specific Direct. That's been the MO for the Switch 2 so far, and who knows, I mean, again, it is working. The system is selling well. However, the issue with this is then you do lose that sort of North Star game, as releases tend to have much shorter hype cycles. This is an entire trend going across the gaming industry. This is an ironic game to use as an example because it was announced 7 years ago, and it's a meme how long it's taking, but Hollow Knight Silksong came out of nowhere with a trailer after radio silence forever, and then announced the game's release date is 2 weeks away. We got a brand new 3D Donkey Kong game announced and released in the span of 4 months. Across the industry, you're seeing a general trend of developers maybe announcing games early, but not showing a bunch until it's pretty close to done to avoid delays, and announcing the release date mere months before the actual release date rather than a whole year ahead, once again to try and combat delays. However, here's an interesting thought experiment. Let's apply that to Splatoon. What if we do get a September Direct, and we get a Splatoon Raiders trailer in that, or maybe they just randomly release it on Nintendo Today again? Then announcing a release date a couple of months after that wouldn't be too surprising. I could easily see Nintendo following this trend of sticking all their third-party Direct announcements in a partner showcase and then just having one big Direct for their games. games. However, that's the thing. In doing that and getting rid of the standard direct format, fans will immediately become less engaged. That air of mystery around a Nintendo Direct where anything could be the next game announcement is completely destroyed by exclusively having game-specific directs. I'm sure nothing I am saying in this video is news to Nintendo's marketing and communications team. And because of that, I do expect a return for regular Nintendo Directs. Not only because it's easier to make Switch 1 announcements there, such as games like Tomodachi Life, the new Rhythm Heaven, or what have you, but it also keeps the fans more engaged, as I predict if Nintendo did go exclusively the game-specific Direct route, over the course of a couple of years, you would see interest and chatter in Nintendo die down significantly. So I guess the answer is, does Nintendo need to keep doing general Directs? Need? Probably not, but it would certainly benefit them in keeping an engaged community. After all, what is a community to a corporation but just a group of consumers who are devoted to buying your product? Nintendo basically found gold in the direct communication format, and I'm sure they know not to mess with it too much going forward. However, now we have to flip everything on its head, because I'm sorry for the contradiction, but there is one thing that I could see as being kind of like a game-specific, or more so event-specific direct that could happen very soon, and that is Mario's 40th anniversary. Now, I have to say this, nothing about Mario's 40th anniversary has been communicated from at all by Nintendo, but I've played these games before. If you remember in 2020, Mario's 35th anniversary, which seems like a less important anniversary than 40, was celebrated tremendously. However, throughout the entire year, we didn't actually hear anything about it until the big 35th anniversary Direct, which was an event-specific Direct that announced a decent amount of things, and this Direct happened on like September 4th, with Super Mario 3D All-Stars, one of the most rumored games to be in that Direct, releasing only a couple of weeks later. We've been talking this entire video about short announcement to release pipelines, and Mario's 35th anniversary is arguably the most infamous example of that in the entire Switch 1 lineup. So specifically with this 40th anniversary Direct, which I do believe will happen, I want to toss out some ideas. Because if this thing's coming in just a couple of weeks, and the games announced in it are potentially releasing only a couple of weeks after that, feels smart for me to get my ideas out there. A lot of people have been talking about Super Mario Galaxy 2 maybe getting like a remake. It makes sense, it was the only one left out of Super Mario 3D All-Stars, but we're talking about Switch 2 exclusive games, and it makes absolutely zero sense for Galaxy 2 to be a Switch 2 exclusive. Even if it was like a 4K remaster with mouse controls, it would still kind of make more sense to just do a Galaxy remaster that can also be on Switch and then has like a Switch 2 edition that lets it be 4K. So I don't know, Galaxy 2 is a little weird to me. What makes a lot more sense is Super Mario 3D Land getting an HD remake with multiplayer that could be Switch 1 and Switch 2, as it could follow the 3D World philosophy of adding in online for that multiplayer. The Switch 2 version of that game could introduce camera play, and maybe even have its own Bowser's Fury side mode, maybe, please? It's a crazy idea, but think about it. 3D World plus Bowser's Fury came out in 2020 at the 35th anniversary celebration. The game released in 2021, but was announced that September. What if the Switch 2 edition of a 3D Land remaster comes with Bowser's Fury, in the same way that the Switch 2 version of Kirby and the Forgotten Land comes with the Star-Crossed World expansion? Hey man, it's possible. That's the closest I see to a Switch 2 exclusive Mario game getting announced though. Other than that, I would expect updates to previous Switch 2 Mario games, just the one, it's Mario Kart World, but that will still be cool. And maybe some previous Switch 1 Mario games getting more Switch 2 editions. I think a Mario Bros. Wonder Switch 2 edition could do really, really well. There is a 2D platformer Void currently on the Switch 2, because it did just launch, but I mean, hey. And screw it, I think they'll do the voice cast of the next like Mario movie. I don't know, I'm just throwing that in there. We'll finally learn who's voicing Wario. Alright, those are my predictions. When they all come true, you can come back to this video and say you heard it here first. Are these predictions or am I leaking something? Who knows? Maybe if I get these right, I can claim I was leaking something. Alright, I'll see y'all in the next one. That's my take on all of the Nintendo Direct nonsense going on right now. Tons of videos about the actual video games coming soon, like our layer ranking for Donkey Kong Bonanza. Some really fun, cool secret projects too, so subscribe so you don't miss them, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace, guys.